Good evening. I am Vanessa Scherer, the director of the Columbia-Paris Alliance Program, and on behalf of the Alliance Program and the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you all tonight at Columbia for a unique panel discussion on freedom of expression. The concept of freedom of expression deserved informed debate to go beyond the linear or dichotomist cleavages it is too often portrayed. And tonight we are extremely fortunate to have with us 5 distinguished guests who will share with us their views on the very definition of freedom of expression across continents, across history. They will exchange on the cultural, the religious, the political, the philosophical, the legal underpinnings of freedom of expression. And of course, freedom of expression is widely taught at Columbia University across campus and is of great interest to our students on campus, and of course of great interest to our faculty as well. And I'd like to thank some of them tonight, without whom this gathering would not have been possible. So I'd like to thank my colleagues and the faculty at the Center for Democracy, Toleration and Religion, the Institute for Religion, Culture and Public Life, the Middle East Institute, the European Institute, the Maison Française, the European Legal Studies Center, and the International Media Advocacy and Communication Specialization at SIPA. And above all, I'd like to extend my warmest thanks tonight to the LICRA, the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, who has been co-sponsoring this event with us tonight. All of you know the LICRA, but still I will say it is a major human rights NGO accredited to the United Nations. And in particular tonight, I would like to thank you very much, the president of the LICRA in the US, Madame Martine Rubinstein, without whom the panel we're going to hear from tonight would not have been possible. So thank you to Martine and to the LICRA. And so now, on behalf of the Columbia community, it's a great honor for me to welcome our guests tonight. So welcome to Columbia, Monsieur Bernard-Henri Lévy. Bernard-Henri Lévy, the French philosopher and author, the author of American Vertigo, most of you have read, I'm sure, and whose voice, actions, and writings have kept raising the very fine question of what it means to stand for democratic standards in a global era. We also have with us Professor Peter Hahn. Peter Hahn is actually a great friend of the Alliance Program. I'm delighted to have him with us tonight. Peter Hahn is the Dean of the School of General Studies at Columbia University. Peter Hahn is the director of the Middle East Institute at Columbia University. And Peter Hahn is a professor of religion, a great specialist of Islamic religion and comparative religion. We also have with us University Professor Kent Greenawalt, whose seminal work on free speech and the First Amendment has paved the way for American academia, and who will present for us tonight the American position on our topic. And we have with us as well Philippe Schmidt, a lawyer based in Paris, and a Columbia alumnus as well, for that matter, from the law school. Philippe Schmidt is the vice president of the LICRA, and he's also the president of the INACH, the International Network Against Cyber Hate. And last but not least, please let me welcome to Columbia our moderator tonight, widely admired and praised editor of The New Yorker, Mr. David Remnick, who will moderate our panel discussion tonight. So we will start right away with a panel discussion among our panelists that will be moderated by David Remnick. We will then open the floor for a Q&A session with the audience. It's a great tradition at Columbia that we want to keep, that is to say, exchange with the audience. There is a mic in the central alley, so for those of you who don't know, you will be invited to stand up in line, and we'll take 3 questions at a time for our panelists. And then we'll end our session with concluding remarks by Bernard-Henri Lévy. Dear guests, thank you again. We're extremely grateful to have you all with us tonight. I have to say that your presence truly embodies what we at the Alliance program try to do semester after semester and on a daily basis, that is to say, attempt to offer a platform for transatlantic debate, a platform for dialogue on the pressing issues of our times, always rooted in the academia. Thank you and enjoy our debate tonight.
Good evening, I'm David Remnick, and I should say, I'll be very, very brief, that as an editor, I get invited every once in a while to a First Amendment discussion, whether national or international or local, at a journalism school or university or here or there. And it's with a dose of some guilt. Why some guilt? Because one recognizes one's preposterous good fortune. And just to tell you a personal story, I had never been an editor of anything other than my high school newspaper before beginning as the editor of The New Yorker. Whatever preposterous calculation went into that decision, I leave to somebody else. I will tell you my experience of being an editor and what the First Amendment meant, my very rapid discovery, is after a couple of months of loosely defined editing The New Yorker, we had a story by a journalist you probably know named Seymour Hersh. And this is 1998, and Cy wrote a story in which he accused almost everybody of almost everything, including the idea that the Prime Minister of Russia had taken bribes from Saddam Hussein and other various crimes and misdemeanors. I had been at the Washington Post as a boy, and the only thing I knew was that Ben Bradley, then the great editor of the Washington Post, would call Katharine Graham, the proprietor of the Washington Post, and say, I just wanted to let you know we're going to publish, I don't know, Watergate tomorrow. It was called the no surprises rule. So I called my proprietor, Cy Newhouse, who owns the magazine Lock, Stock, and Barrel, and I said, we're going to publish this story accusing almost everybody of almost everything next week. But don't worry, it's been checked unto a fare thee well, and lawyers have read it, and I have great confidence, and I even know all the sources that the reader may not know. And there was a long pause at the end of the telephone, and Cy Newhouse said, that sounds very interesting. That was it. That was the last time I ever called him about any story, about anything, whether it was Abu Ghraib or anything of the kind. And there may be limitations on what we do, and there may be ideological arguments about what we do, but in terms of the issues that we're going to discuss tonight, we are extraordinarily, people on this panel are extraordinarily, as you are, fortunate to be in the situation we are in. Not everyone is. Tonight we're going to begin with a format in which everybody on the panel will begin with a 5-minute introductory statement, argument, sense of situation in their field. Then we will get into a discussion, which I'll lead for a while. And then you will ask some questions, not statements, not speeches, but ask questions of anyone you choose. And then at the end, Bernard, quite in the style of the closing aria in any good opera, will give a closing statement. And I want to thank you in advance for your patience and cooperation, and I hope your rigorous participation when it comes your turn. We'll begin with Bernard-Henri Levy.
Yeah, thank you, David Remnick. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to apologize in front of the 180 people, I think, who have been left outside and who are condemned to see us through a screen. The audience was, the hall was not big enough to receive everybody, and we are, I know that David Remnick shares my apologies. We are so sorry for that. In 5 minutes, to tell you my feeling is, of course, very difficult. I would just like to put the following point. We are received here, we are speaking under the behalf of an organization, a French one, which is called LICRA, the president of it, Patrick Gobert, being here on the first rank, which is in principle devoted to prevent, condemn some sort of speeches. We must not hide ourselves behind our finger. It is a fact that the LICRA has been created in order to prevent, to censor some sorts of speeches, some sorts of words. Appeal to crime, number one. Appeal to crime. Advocacy of crime. LICRA is done to stop that under penalty of law. Number two, advocacy for this sort of crime, which is anti-Semitism and racism. LICRA has been founded upon the idea that anti-Semitism and racism are not ideas, are not opinions, but are criminal acts and should be condemned as such. LICRA, I think, as all sorts of anti-defamation leagues in the world, believe also that you can have some words, some speeches who are able to commit crimes on huge scale. I would take only one example, the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, which neither the LICRA nor anybody had even the time to stop, was really a genocide committed by words. It was not only accompanied by words. It was not only with words, with additional words. Words was really the weapon by which the crime was committed. So we know in France, you know in America, LICRA knows better than anybody else. It is its founding stone that words can be criminal, and that, as a French poet Stéphane Mallarmé said at the time of the trial of an anarchist guy called Félix Fénéon, beginning, end of the 19th century, words can be bombs. Words can be the most efficient of the bombs. So no angelism, no demagogy. This is a part of the problem. This being said, what is true and what motivated our gathering of today is that there is today in America, in Europe, all over the world, a new trend trying to censor the speech, trying to censor the free speaking on behalf not of preventing crime, but under the pretext of respecting, paying respect, paying homage to some communities. We have a new topic today, which is, by respect of some communities, some words should be forbidden and censored. This is the topic of today. Not the sort of words which helped to commit and did commit genocide in Rwanda and could commit now genocide in Burundi, but these sort of words which are supposed to attack, to indignate, to blaspheme a community or a religion, especially in the field of Islamism. This is a new, not only, but especially. On this, I give you very quickly my personal reply, which I submit according to the tradition of this place to the discussion of the audience and of my fellow partners. My reply is the following, 2 points or 3 points. Point number one, for any community And therefore, for this community of communities, which is a nation, which is a people, a nation, freedom of speech is the first of all the freedoms. If you take away, if you retire, if you withdraw the freedom of speech, it is as if you withdrew the main brick which makes the whole castle, the whole house consistent. So our Muslim friends who say, for instance, that some sort of speeches, some sort of cartoons should be forbidden in the name of the respect of Islam must know that if we take away this freedom, all the other freedoms will fall apart. This is what Benjamin Constant said. This is the theory of Alexis de Tocqueville, and I know that you have in this country many thinkers whom I know much less than all of you, who would say the same. Second reply which I deliver to the audience, and I submit to discussion. There is a sort of trick, there is a sort of tour de passe-passe, there is a sort of operation of contraband. How do you say contraband? Smuggle. There is a smuggling operation. These sort of people tell us we defend the respect of our community. In reality, they say something else. They defend some values which have nothing to do with democracy, with respect of the community, and so on. Especially in the field of Islam, you have today a real fight inside Islam between democratic forces and integrist, fundamentalist or fascist forces. When you preach the limitation of freedom of speech, you give your favor to, you give your preference to, you give a help to the integrist, fundamentalist and fascist wings, tendencies inside Islam. We must know that one begins with the so-called respect of the values of Islam. In reality, the real deal, the real undercurrent smuggling is to fight for the denial of the faith of the women, the possibility of killing of somebody who changed religion, the apostasy, and so on. And this is number two. And number three, what I personally think is that the real respect of a community, the real respect of a religion, whatever it is, consists precisely in showing that she is able, or it is able, to stand, to receive, without being broken, without falling into pieces, these sorts of attacks. The right of blasphemy, blasphemy you say? Mm-hmm. The right of blasphemy is a right for the free thinkers, of course, but it is also a right which I do think, when it is implemented, not weakens, but reinforces, proves the solidity and the consistency of the religion or the community which is concerned. A religion which is not able to stand, to do with blasphemy. A religion which would feel not only wounded, but killed, but stricken to death by a blasphemy, is a religion which is already dead. So what I mean is that even in the interest of these sorts of communities, even if you take the point of view of those who, with real faith, with real soul and mind, are attached to their values, right to blasphemy is essential also for them. Christianity would have been dead since long without Voltaire and without other free thinkers who have implemented blasphemy, helped the Christian thinkers to resist blasphemy, to build some, to develop some antidotes, to develop some forces of resistance to that. And it will be the same for Islam. So for the sake of democracy, for the sake of anti-fascism, and for the sake of these religions or communities of today who pretend to be wounded by free speech, we have to defend free speech more than ever today.
Thank you. Peter Ohl.
Let me take a slightly different tack. As professor of Islam, I'd love to be able to argue Islam is so unique, it's totally different from everything else. In fact, it's as conventional as any other religious tradition. Religious traditions espouse truth claims. The argument is that if you embrace that truth claim, that truth should be embodied in the way you live. The dilemma comes when religious communities become either partially or fully engaged with the apparatus of the state and are able, therefore, to impose a vision of homogeneity on their society. Christian society did this for centuries. The blasphemy laws in the UK were abolished in the 1990s. Now, am I saying how terrible the Brits were? No. It harks back to the tradition when Christianity was the ideological underpinning of many European societies. So the issue isn't embedded within a particular religious tradition. It's the extent to which a society engages this effort on the part of religious communities to argue for their truth claims and that their vision ought to be embraced or imposed on everyone else, and how the rest of society reacts against it. Quite interestingly, in contrast to the European experience, I assure you, you do not find many American Muslims screaming that they are being offended in the United States. Why? Because to be an American is to be offended. Any religious community that doesn't learn how to navigate the criticisms, the blasphemies that occur on a daily basis, be you Jewish, be you Christian, be you evangelical, be you Muslim, be you a secularist, is not engaged fully in the structures of American society. In a sense, it works here because everyone's in the same boat. And the ability of Muslims to adapt in the United States as immigrants, in fact, they've adapted more quickly, more effectively than almost any other immigrant community in the history of this country. So it is not Islam that represents some kind of threat to democracy, but it is true that immigrants coming from homogeneous environments where, in fact, religious ideals were enshrined in the structures of the state do have difficulty engaging societies in which freedom of speech is cherished, and you better be ready to take your lumps. To end, I would also say that societies that haven't done quite as well as one would like in coping with the influx of immigrant populations tend to have more of these ideological conflicts, underneath which are frequently very important social and political conflicts that are far more important, I would say, necessarily, than arguments over a burqa or whether you wear a headscarf to school. However, let me end by saying the construction of secularism is not the same as you move from the United States to Europe. In class, I could care less whether you wore bananas on your head. It is irrelevant, the dress code in an American classroom. But Americans are horrified at the thought of supporting religious schools with tax dollars. Laïcité in France is focused on the school system, on ensuring that everyone becomes a French citizen in that context. So no, you can't wear a yarmulke, you can't wear a cross, you can't wear a headscarf. But they will go ahead and support religious schools because they want religious schools to be of the quality of the public school system. It's a totally different construction of secularism. I'm not arguing one's better or one is worse, but they're different. And it's in that context that one has to understand the function of religious ideology and the secular state.
Thank you. Kent Greenawalt.
Thanks. So I'm going to take my 5 minutes to try to sort of sketch the legal and constitutional situation here in the United States. The legal status is mainly controlled by our First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Now, originally, that applied only against the federal government, and it's made applicable against the states by the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War. In our early history, states had laws against blasphemy, casting aspersions on or denying Christian truths. The only blasphemy that was wrong was against Christianity, and also against profanity. And this was true even in states that had no establishment of religion provisions. Now such laws would be regarded as violations of the Establishment Clause and the Free Speech Clause, and if these assertions were made as part of somebody's religious convictions contrary to what they were blaspheming, it would be protected by free exercise as well. So what are the ground rules for when speech can be punished? Well, if you directly solicit somebody else to commit a crime, that can be punished. But if you incite to criminal violence, more generally, like kill all the Jews, something along those lines, that can be punished only if the advocacy is directed to or inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and is likely to incite or produce such action. So that's very limiting, even in terms of advocacy of illegal or criminal action. Now, this leaves us with the categories of what we might loosely call hate speech or fighting words. And this would be reached by breach of the peace statutes or harassment statutes that would forbid these. So this is language that's deeply offensive to the audience. And we can imagine that forms of blasphemy could constitute an extreme denigration of a group of believers or individuals. And we do know that some forms have produced violent reactions. So could there be a basis for prohibition here? Well, fighting words have been conceived as in face-to-face encounters, and the comments are protected unless they produce a violent response in the average addressee. Now, there are nuances about who could the average addressees be, what percentages of violent responses would you need to think there'd be, and some notion of equality of audiences and sort of basic ideas. But I'm going to pass over all of those. So one problem is that you might produce somebody fighting, but that's very limited. Hate speech can be wounding to listeners, and I think we have to be aware of that thinking about these general problems, that something that is directed at an individual that's very offensive and abusive can be quite wounding. And that's especially true if the comments are actually aimed, as they sometimes are, at humiliating somebody. And sometimes people are sought out just to humiliate them. So probably in theory that could be protected, but it's so hard to decide what somebody's motive is when they engage in this kind of action. This speech can be deeply offensive in some situations to a broader audience.
Can you please talk in the mic? Some people can hear you very well.
Bring it forward. Yeah, I'm sorry. And there are also a question of long-term harms that perpetuating negative stereotypes, silencing people in a minority or oppressed group, and we can think of sexist and racist speech along these lines, And forms of blasphemy could be used in this kind of way. So I think we could imagine situations in which would be a kind of hate speech that could conceivably be punished, but that's a very narrow category. There would be more latitude in campus speech codes, although I think one has to be very careful about those, and in workplace harassment. Discrimination on the basis of religion is a form of workplace harassment, and we might imagine that blasphemy about somebody's religion directed at them could be a form of harassment. But in general, if publications are deeply offensive on religious grounds, the basic rule in the United States is that people have to tolerate that, and that on balance this is desirable as an aspect of religious freedom and freedom of speech. The United States is more speech protective than virtually any other country, and I think that in an overall evaluation of whether that's desirable or not, one has to think a bit about history and culture. But in general, I think the idea of a lot of protection for speech is on balance a good idea.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Philippe Schmidt.
Great. Kent, I'm going to follow up on you because you just explained the legislation in the US, and I'm very happy that after hearing Kent, you understand that it's not true to say, it's not correct to say that there's no limit in the US to freedom of speech. There is always a limit, and the controversy is, where is the limit? That's the controversy. That's the controversy, very interesting, and in fact, the views in the US are very different from the views in other Western countries, Western democracies, so not completely different countries. And the lawyers, the professors, the thinkers, the politicians are not able to discuss and to go forward together on what is the limit. The problem is today we need to have a common limit. And why do we need to have a common limit? It's because of the internet. Freedom of expression today will occur mainly on the internet. That's where everybody can speak and can send a message all over the world. And if you have a legislation in one country, it will not apply if someone can go in another country and, of course, send messages, open a website, be a member of Facebook or whatever. So we need today to have a common approach, and I think I would like today to be also the beginning of a common approach, because up to today, when you have people, again, lawyers, whatever, speaking together on those kind of issues, they cannot understand each other. I'm not only me, but in a different position, because both educated in Europe and in the US, I'm like in the middle of the Atlantic, and I can feel and understand both values, because you said why we have different legislation on free speech, denial of the Holocaust, all those issues, it's because of our past. But today, the future means that we have to find a common approach. We have to find a common legislation. It's really, I think, today with the internet, for me, the main topic, because the US, the First Amendment, is it the good answer? Do you think that indeed, in fact, the incitement to violence should be the only limit? Or, as we think in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, so very close to here, you have also to respect the dignity of the person. And of course, now comes in all the issue regarding the defamation of religion. On this issue, we are very clear. We protect human beings. We do not protect ideas in no way. And I just want to tell you that, yes, there is a trend at the United Nations Human Rights Council to try to have defamation of religion, they did pass 3 resolutions in 5 years. But you have to know also that in Ireland, so member of the European Union, they just passed a blasphemy law. So we think that it will not be legal because of European legislation. But for the time being, you've got a new legislation very recently in Ireland, and it's not the only European country. So yes, you see, we go from the First Amendment to defamation of religion. In the middle, you've got countries like France and other European countries. And now, if we want to have a common ground, we need to find a common legislation. That's really my approach.
Philippe, maybe I'll begin with Philippe. I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting. We've just been witness to an international meeting in Copenhagen where what was at stake was quite potentially an ecological catastrophe that could swamp us all. And we left with an agreement so slight, so dissolute as to beggar the imagination. What we've had a description of here is the vast differences of whether blasphemy is even good or bad. How do you suggest monitoring the internet, legislating the internet, when the cultures involved, whether it's even difference between the French and the United States, much less Saudi Arabia and France or Yemen, or how do you, what do you have in mind as the realm of the possible, or even the realm of the good and the desirable?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, regarding the environment, at least there is a beginning of the countries speaking together. And obviously, you're right, it will be a long time. We just have a speech from Hillary Clinton. It will be a long, long time to arrive to something that will be agreed by all the countries. However, we can start. We can start the United States and the other Western countries. I mean, for instance, when you fight cyber hate in Europe, our main problem is not Saudi Arabia. It's because, you know, if someone wants to establish itself, it's not going to Saudi Arabia. It's going
I think
to
maybe
the
then you should give us examples of what cyber hate are, and what their dangers are and why they should be acted upon.
Okay, so for instance, if you have, and again, we are not tonight going to decide whether or not denial of the Holocaust should be authorized. When I say we are not going to discuss, of course we can. I don't want to. I'm for free speech. But you've got many countries where denial of the Holocaust is forbidden, period. Okay? You've got democratic countries, Germany, Austria, Australia, Canada, many. And if you want if you have someone who is having a website, for instance, with denial of Holocaust materials, if this person is in France, you can go after it. You go after this person. So what is going to do this person is going to establish in the US. And thanks to the First Amendment, or because of the First Amendment, we will not be able to pursue this person.
Can I hear from this side of the panel whether legislation against the denial of the Holocaust is necessarily either a priority or good, and extended to any either conspiracy thinking or preposterous historical theorizing? Bernard?
It's a difficult question, this question of denial of, of condemning and putting a law against denial of Holocaust and denial of other genocides, not only Holocaust. On one side, one could say, and I have a lot of friends who say, it is so stupid to deny Holocaust, and the truth is so strong, the evidence is so clear, that we should let the good currency get rid of the bad currency. Why make a law? This is an acceptable argument. We could think like that. On the other side, the reason why, as for myself, after having thought at length on this question for years, I finally decided that the law was good is the following. I will say it, I'm sorry, very shortly, in few words, but it supposes it could be developed. For me, the denial of the genocide is part of the genocide itself. It is part of the genocide. It is very clear in the genocide against Jews, as you know, the structure of the genocide supposed had embedded into itself the fact of the denial. The SS, Himmler, and so on said, not only we will kill them, but we are going to erase the trace of the killing. The denial is part of the crime. Same for the Armenians. The committers, the executioners of the Holocaust of the Armenians said exactly the same. It is not enough to kill. We have to, at the same time, in the same movement, in the same breathing, we have to commit and erase the crime. So there is a very peculiar structure of genocide. It is not a crime as another one. There is a peculiar structure which, having the denial integrated in the crime, makes the possibility and imposes, I think, the necessity of punishing the denial, which is part of the crime.
I'd like Ken and Peter also to address this.
So I think there is an argument about whether it should be not allowed in European countries, but your reason struck me as quite implausible for the following reason. Assuming that part of the idea of genocide, or that particular genocide, was that it was also going to be covered up, that was part of what it was, but now we're generations later, and the question is, should people be able to deny that that existed or not? To me, it wouldn't make any difference. Suppose their basic idea had been, let's publicize that to everybody, and that it's great we're doing this, and we're the same few generations later, and some people are denying that it took place. So I don't see the connection between the denial or that it took place generations later and what the underlying philosophy was of the genocide in the first place. That seems to be a pretty remote relation.
Very briefly, I don't want to legislate against stupidity. That I want to see it out in front, and it usually is an indicator of something far more pernicious. And if, in fact, that stupidity represents a deeply ingrained evil and hate, I want it out in public so it can be dealt with and debated. You legislate against it, it never cures the problem, it pushes it underground.
It is not stupidity. Look, even genocide of Rwanda, it's very interesting. It's really something which is peculiar to genocides, which is part of genocide. Even in Rwanda, a few years after, a few months after, maybe at the very moment you had already people practicing the denial. You have not denial of anything. Nobody denies that New York is in the United States. Nobody denies today that the earth is round, and so on. There is a very specific mania concerning genocide and genocide only, including maybe Cambodia and Darfur. It is really part of the scheme. It is really part of the enterprise. So it is really part of the crime. It is not only stupidity, not only a fantasy. We have to think metaphysically the link between the denial and the crime. This is a real point.
Bernard,
after having thought that, law or not law, this is a
Bernard,
discussion.
if I walk into even a hotel bookstore in Cairo, I can buy copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. When I lived in Washington, D.C., and I walked into a left-wing bookstore, I forget what it was, I could buy copies of Lenin and Stalin. where does the legislating stop? Isn't the question have to do with social context, where buying a copy of Stalin in the United States in 1989 is fairly harmless and actually an academic endeavor, whereas quite possibly buying the other book in the other place has another repercussion? Where does the legislating stop and not? And by the way, I'm fully aware of the skittish structure of this discussion, which you will bring down to earth in your own questions in a while.
I'm not in favor of censoring anything. Stalin, of course not. Lenin, even less. And even protocol of the elders of Zion, I'm not in favor of censoring. There is a debate in France about Louis Ferdinand Céline. Louis Ferdinand Céline, you have a twofold work.
These are, excuse me, the novels of, and now notebooks of Céline, who wrote Journey to the End of the Night, and whose anti-Semitism runs even more deeply than we even knew before until these things were published just recently.
Exactly.
There's a good piece in the New York Review of Books about it.
You have huge novels of Céline which belongs to the best of literature of the 20th century, and you have 3 books, Bagatelle pour un massacre, École des cadavres et Les beaux draps, which are disgusting anti-Semitic books. There is a debate in France on the question to know if they have to be censored or not. They are censored. I'm against. I think they should not be censored. People should make their own opinion about that. No doubt. The protocol of the elders of Zion is so stupid, is so crazy. This I agree. They should be allowed. In the Arab countries, the problem is not to censor Protocol of Elder of Zion. It is to put the question of the fascism in Arab countries, which has never been really raised, this question. It is much further than the book Protocol. There is a real participation of the Arab world, as in Europe, to the fascism, and this question has never been uncovered. So the question today is not to censor, it is to uncensor. In the Arab country, the work to do is not to put censorship on this book or that. It is the contrary, to suppress the censorship on a huge piece of the collective memory, which is the fascist part of the Arab memory. You have in Egypt, you have in Jordan, you have in Iraq, you have in Syria, a big bunch of the local memory, which is as compromised with fascism as France, as Italy, as Romania, as Hungary, and so on. The question has been raised. The mourning has been done, le deuil, the mourning, the sorrow and the mourning. In Germany, in France, it was not so easy. It was a hard work, very painful. Some families have been broken, some lives and some reputation have been destroyed, but it has been done all over the world, except in these countries where you can find the Protocol of Elder. So the question is not to censor, the contrary. It is to open.
Peter, we speak of the Arab world. Maybe you could speak of the diversity, if you like, of the state of play of these questions there.
I would agree with Bernard that you find a number of Islamic societies and a number of Arab societies that really are totalitarian and in which discourse is controlled and there is a kind of political ideology that really is imposed and taught in the schools, et cetera, et cetera. It's completely unhealthy. It stifles, really, the educated elites who do try to move beyond the limitations. Added that the religious right is a horribly threatening environment, both within Islamic societies as well as outside. But it isn't because of Islam, it's because of the state of these various societies in terms of economics, politics, and their relationships with the state of Israel. That has been the catalyst for really this cliche and deeply embedded, frequently anti-Semitic view of Jews and Israeli society. Now, I think, again, within Israeli society, you're not going to find the happiest depictions of Islam and or Arabs. But I think, again, that has a lot to do with the political issues and social issues, not fundamentally religious.
Peter, some years ago now, what year was Yitzhak Rabin assassinated? Mid-90s, right? The question came up whether the actual campaign in which Bibi Netanyahu was taking place, there was a lot of talk, loose talk and political talk, that because Rabin was negotiating with and coming to agreements with the Palestinians, that he was deserving of violence, that according to law as interpreted, Jewish law as interpreted by some of these people, that anytime you give away any part of Jewish lands, I'll spare you the scare quotes, whether it's the West Bank or Gaza or any other portion of Israeli, either occupied or Israeli land, that it was legitimate to visit violence upon that politician. There was a lot of loose talk. Some of it implicitly, in the opinion of some, encouraged by major political candidates, including Netanyahu. We know what happened. A fanatic shot and killed Yitzhak Rabin. Should that kind of speech, whether it was in yeshivot or in the street or in political speech, been banned and legislated against? And you want to take that, Philippe?
Yeah, it's again, and with free speech, because we are human rights lawyers. It means that, of course, and I want to say it again, we are for free speech, but when we have to put the limit, and as a matter of fact, the human right, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights itself says there has to be free speech. It's a principle, but just after the Universal Declaration says there's a need for limit. And that's your question. And again, we go back to what is the question. In the case of Rabin, I mean, we remember very well that indeed there was direct incitement to violence. So yes, in this case, I think even with the First Amendment, we could have prosecuted the person who were inciting people to violence. And that's something very interesting, if I may.
You would have put a lot of people in jail at that point.
Yeah.
Just for fact's sake.
Yeah, and again, the fact is, and it goes again to what happened in Rwanda, and with the internet now, you've got incitement to hatred that destroy life. And yes, in this case, you need to protect the lives of those persons. And you've got also something that you know better in the US than in France, for instance, cyberbullying. You know cyberbullying? The fact is that you've got now kids, and they are going to be harassed through the internet. And I did a conference at the UN like 6 months ago, and I heard, and I'm sure you know this story, of this young person, 14 years old, and he was harassed by the other student through the internet. And his parents were not in a position to see that because it was on his computer. So at school he was harassed, he went back to home, he was harassed, always harassed. And again, it was not direct incitement to violence, but yes, they destroyed his life, and as a matter of fact, he committed suicide. So, and that's something with the internet that comes and comes. And again, I mean, I love the internet. It's amazing. But yes, when we need to put some limits, we have to. And yes, in the case of Rabin, obviously some of the people could have been jailed, and who knows? I mean, perhaps it could have changed the life of Rabin and of the region.
I think Ken wanted to say something on this question of internet legislation.
Just on this, we do have a law against threatening the life of the president, so that's sort of special. But I think picking up on your point about this thing, it's so hard to know when the discussion is serious. People talked about killing Obama during the campaign and so on, and it's very difficult. I just wanted to mention on the internet thing, it's not just the United States government negotiating something that might be some kind of compromise with the other countries, but this, suppose you agreed on something, the Supreme Court might come along and say, no, that violates the First Amendment. So
you can change the First Amendment.
I think that'll only apply if you're a corporation, so far as I can tell. A corporation with eyes.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because if I just one remark, I mean, it's very important. The First Amendment applies only to the government. So when you have companies like Facebook saying, okay, we don't want to stop, for instance, denial of Holocaust material, it's wrong. I mean, they can do it. It's just their policy. If they want to do it, they can do it. Nobody can prevent them from doing it.
Okay, let's have that first awkward question from the group. And I think you line up at that microphone would be the great thing. And please, I beg of you, no speeches, questions. And please direct them to somebody on the panel.
Yes, good evening. This gets related.
If you want to introduce yourself, that would be fine too.
Yes, I'm Mr. Cam, and I'm here for area edition of others and myself.
Okay.
This goes to the blasphemy issue. Recently, the Pope encouraged some archbishop, I think in Maryland, to condemn Representative Kennedy for not voting against abortion rights, and considering he was a Catholic. And there were
would not give him communion was the issue.
Yes.
Would not give him communion.
Not give him communion. That's right. I don't know if it's excommunicating.
No.
Okay.
He should be denied communion.
Denied communion. Yes. Okay. Well, what that means in Catholicism, I have no idea how important it is, but it must be important to some Catholics.
Yes.
So there was going to be a public meeting on this, and then the Archbishop promised to do it, and then he reneged on it. And I guess this was probably shortly before the election, would be my guess. This also happened in 2004. There was a photo op with Bush and the Pope, and all of a sudden, Democratic Party politicians only were being criticized for not.
Sir, what's the question?
So the question is.
The question should be as pointed as humanly possible.
It's coming. Do you agree that this is that the Pope should have the right to do this in any, say, other, maybe European country, and should the hierarchy follow his instructions in this way?
Okay, thank you. Who would like to speak for the First Amendment rights of the Catholic Church?
Well, I've done a lot of. Je suis ancien père jésuite. I'm an ex-priest, so I think I can weigh in on this. In fact, for Roman Catholics, the Pope can say whatever the heck he wants, and people will do what they think is right according to their conscience. That's a fundamental principle in Roman Catholicism. They have tried to play this political game with abortion rights, with gay rights, with gay marriage. It is part of this constant back and forth within American society where religious institutions try to have an impact on the structures of the state universally. Every religious community tries. Sometimes they win a bit, more often they lose.
Okay.
Can I just say something?
Yes, absolutely, Kent, go ahead.
I mean, the principle that the religions can do this is as relevant for liberal causes like civil rights and so on, where churches were extremely important in promoting that, and for anti-slavery and so on. So, yes, the Pope should have a right to do this, and as much as we might not like it not being of the Catholic religion, that's their right.
Yes, sir.
Andrew Kessinger, I'm a student at Columbia and at Sciences Po.
Could you speak up?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, Andrew Kessinger, I'm a student at Columbia and Sciences Po, graduate student. It seems to me one of the bigger free speech issues was the Mohammed cartoons in Denmark, which were then republished throughout Europe and, as we know, caused a violent reaction and surprisingly has resurfaced recently with the editor being targeted again violently, and I guess newspapers republishing them once again. So it seems to be a recurrent issue, unfortunately. I was interested in how the United States decided not to publish the cartoons, what your thoughts were as to why the major newspapers and journals did not publish it, and if there are any lessons learned, any societal differences that could be applied in that case.
Maybe you should answer this.
I should answer it? Yeah. We publish what we publish. And, to republish other things as acts of solidarity seems gratuitous. We spoke forthrightly for the right to do this. Now, the dangers and the attacks on them have been disgusting, in my view. It's as simple as that.
But yet you chose not to publish it. Was there any reason?
We publish what we publish. In other words, we publish the work that we are generating. We don't Xerox from other places. We defended their right to do it. We support them. I've met with the editor. I've been public about my support about it. It's really...
But were there American publications that, let's say it hadn't been a religious thing, it would be very interesting internationally, they would have published...
I have to say, I don't think that I can be accused of not... Look at last summer. Last summer, I have a very liberal, I think, fairly liberal readership. And we published a cover in which... Yes. Yeah. You're here for a First Amendment? We published a cover in the teeth of, it's odd to call it accusations, but notions and rumors and preposterous bile thrown at the Obamas that they were radicals, that they were, that Michelle Obama was some kind of Angela Davis, and that Barack Obama was a Muslim, as if this were innately a bad thing, a terrorist, was unpatriotic. And so Barry Blitt, our artist, did something that really aroused the ire of, thousands of our readers, including the Obamas, although I think their reaction was a bit politically measured, but there it was. And we received thousands of letters, some threats, and we live to go on. In other words, I'm not there as a Xerox machine for somebody else's cartoons. If we're going to provoke, we're going to provoke by generating our own work. And I have to say it was deeply unpleasant. Nowhere near what was encountered there. But if you're going to publish a magazine, it should be provocative, and provocative in the way that you want it to be. Anyone else?
Yes, about the cartoons. I hear what you say, but it is not only a question of Xerox. It is a question of solidarity. When your friend and my friend Salman Rushdie was condemned to death for having integrated in one of his novels 3 sentences which were felt as an insult to dignity of Islam, you had in France a reflex of solidarity of all publishers. He was published by one publisher, like Random House or Knopf or whatever, who was Christian Bourgois. When he was condemned, all French publishers, I know the story because I took the initiative of that at this time, 10 or 12 French publishers associated themselves to the publisher. They Xeroxed the book in a way. The book from this time and for the following month and years was published by 8, 10, 12, I don't know, publishers. So not Xerox, solidarity. When you are in front of such an affair, because in the affair of the cartoons, that's why the question of the young man is interesting. It was a self-inflicted blasphemy, the affair of the cartoons. Because if you think of the story thoroughly, the cartoons were published in a newspaper, Gillan Posten.
That's right.
Which, as for myself, I never heard about. I never heard in my life.
It's a tiny magazine.
Tiny magazine. I'm not sure you knew it so well, even.
No. Okay. Despite my fluency in Danish.
You can imagine what the people of Mazar-i Sharif in Afghanistan, of Damas in Syria, of Isfahan in Iran, if they heard about Gillan Posten. So what happened? You had some activists political activists, not religious thinkers, not religious worshippers, but political activists who took the Gilles Posten, who put them under the nose of the worshippers, who designated them, and who really, the blasphemy was not inflicted by the Gilles Posten, but the burn was put in the brains by these political activists. Why did they do that?
I understand, but I think you have the story at least a little bit wrong. Is they had no idea when they published this that this would cause this. I know this directly from the editor.
Of course, they could not have any idea.
They had no. It was done rather not blithely, but with absolutely no. And this always happens when you get a gigantic reaction. You actually, it's the things that you don't anticipate that cause the biggest reaction.
But what exactly? Yeah. But what I'm telling you is that Gilles Posten did something without anticipating. Then there was a declaration of war, launched by some people in Syria, in Hamas, wherever, who decided to put fire. Fire in embassies, they fired some Christian priests, I don't know where, and so on. War being declared by those guys. I think that we had the duty, you did it, in New Yorker. In France, very few did it. Charlie Hebdo, a very tiny newspaper, did it. We had to manifest in this war, which Gilles Posten did not declare, who was declared by the self-inflicting blasphemators I'm thinking about. We had to show our solidarity. Why were we so few to do it? That is the question. Were so few newspapers manifested their solidarity? Because of fear. We were afraid. In front of this huge fire, which was launched by these few people spreading Gilles Posten, who never in his history had such a glory, in front of that, we were afraid. I can tell about my country, very respectable newspapers who would not have dared at any price to reproduce, to Xerox, or to manifest their solidarity. So always the same. In front of extremism, of fanaticism, of fascism, Democrats have all possible virtues, merits, except sometimes and generally courage.
Thank
you.
And I want to add, just to add to what Bernard, I don't think that you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think, if our expression of doing this by dint of writing about it as opposed to putting the cartoons was somehow insufficient, then I plead guilty. But it was not out of any sense of immediate fear. It was just, this happened, we wrote about it immediately and expressed solidarity with them. And had met publicly with the editor and all the rest. I don't know where it was, these cartoons were republished in the United States. I really don't. I have no idea.
No way.
No, I don't think so.
No way.
And just as a matter of fact, to complete what you said, even the different governments, I mean, Danish products were boycotted by many Arab countries, and European countries didn't do anything, or the United States, in solidarity.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Abby Pogrubin. I'm a writer. For Mr. Schmidt, you had mentioned that there was this bullying event which kind of gathered steam. And there was a PBS documentary called Growing Up Online that documented many cases of kids being tormented, very privately at first, but it, again, snowballs to the point where some commit suicide. And since we're in a university, I'm wondering what you think is appropriate and possible, because we do live in America where we value free speech, but clearly when they're kids or students, is there a different standard, and should there be? And for anyone else who wants to address it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's very important to have awareness of a problem and awareness for the parents, the professor, the community. And it's regarding, and it's complicated because, yes, it's behind the computer. And I remember at this conference, there was the director of the school saying, okay, when the kids, they fight in the school, you can see them, you can see the blood. but with the computer you cannot see it. So yeah, it's very complicated, and you need awareness, and full awareness. I think regarding cyberbullying, that's the main thing, to be very, very present with the kids.
But you're saying awareness, you're not saying restrictions.
I mean, it's if the kids are under 18, the parents, you've got many software now that can help, and it's obvious that you need to use them. But restriction, again, you need to be in a position to do it, because how are you going to restrict? What word are you going to take out? It's very complicated. Anyway, we will not have pure internet, and that's not what we want, but it will not be possible to, we are not looking for 100% solution. We are looking for at least to go forward and to 50, 60, 70, 80%.
My name is Hessie Taft. I'm a chemist, but I'm actually an alumnus of Columbia. I want to bring up again the very troubling question about whether one should legislate about the denial of the Holocaust. And my problem is that you didn't want to legislate against stupidity because the overwhelming evidence is so strong and so on, but that doesn't protect future generations. I mean, if you keep on going with generations and generations and denying the Holocaust freely, then in another 2 or 3 generations, history gets rewritten and forgotten. For example, let me bring up another very controversial little point. Today, people don't realize that from the 18th century onward until the end of the British Mandate, the majority of the population of Jerusalem proper was Jewish. The Arab villages were around the edges.
What is your question, ma'am?
My question is, what do you do about, shouldn't there be legislation to protect future generations?
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a few questions at a time, and the panelists will address with the hand. We have a number of questions, limited time. Bernard wants to give and should give a closing statement. So, sir, and we're not ignoring your question, I promise. Well, we're not ignoring it.
My name is David Musazadeh. The question is for Bernard. Today, with the massive migration of the Muslim population into Europe, and the fact that you just talked about this cartoon that got you afraid, and most of Europe today on their toes, how is Europe dealing with the fact that you have the Muslim population a factor to deal with, and most of the political pandering today is very sensitive about how am I going to get their vote, but in the meantime they are changing the entire fabric of the Western society in Europe.
Okay, and one more, and then we'll start with Bernard. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a law student here at Columbia, and I guess my question is for the panel. I took a First Amendment class last semester with Professor Blasi, a First Amendment specialist at the law school, and I wrote a paper on Hill versus Colorado, which is a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court upheld a statute which basically restricted, created a bubble around people entering healthcare facilities. Essentially, this was enacted to protect people trying to get abortions. And I guess my question would be, where do you guys stand on sort of a proportional response to, sort of the tension between the free speech of the sort of activists that are trying to get out this message and the women trying to receive abortions, or would you prefer more of a absolute response to that?
Okay, so I think what we'll do is, Ken, my guess is that's a question for you, internet question for you, and the two gentlemen over here. I swear I'll get to you. If you stay there, I'll get to you. And then the question that went to you and Bernard, I think you two can certainly share that. So Bernard, you want to start? You forgot.
To start what? About which question?
I thought I was doing this so masterfully, and yet it slipped through my hands.
About which question? Denial of Holocaust. Denial of Holocaust, I told you, the only serious reason, the true reason to make a penalty on denial of Holocaust is that it is part of the crime. It is not denial of the crime. Denial of Holocaust is not denial of the crime, it is continuation of the crime. It is part of the crime. The project of Holocaust included the denial. This is the reason why denial should be punished, not only for Holocaust, but also for Armenian genocide, and also for Rwanda. Today in France, you have, I'm sorry for my country, it's like this, we have a school of so-called thought, which is already engaged thoroughly with an incredible energy in denying the Holocaust in Rwanda. Already. A few years after, and you have a lot of political issues in France or political disputes between our Minister of Foreign Affairs, for example, and some people and so on, which are unexplainable without this landscape of the denial of the genocide of Rwanda. It is a sickness of the mind. When you have genocide, you have denial. Why? Because denial is part of the crime. This is the depth of the question, more important than stupidity, bad currency, and so on and so on. This is a deep reply to a deep and vertiginous question.
Kent, I think you should answer the law students.
Just in general, I think one thing is what message you can say, and then another question is at what point can you deliver it to certain people. And I do think that that particular restriction there did make sense, but that's certainly they could say their message someplace else freely.
Philippe, did you have? No? Okay, so again, we can't get to everything. We're doing the best we can, and we'll have these three ask them boom, 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 and we'll have them answered, and then Bernard will speak. Sir.
Yes, my name is Dr. Robert April, and the question is very simple. Well, what do you think about this kind of negative cartoon going on in America about the Fort Hood massacre? I think a wonderful New Yorker cartoon might be the questioning of Dr. Hassan and a caption, "What is it?" Why is there no real media reporting of the nature of this act?
I'm missing your, I don't know what's missing.
The question, it seems to me, is that we are so afraid of blasphemy in our First Amendment country that the press doesn't talk about things that seem to be real. I'm talking about the murder at Fort Hood by the staff psychiatrist in the United States Army.
No, I understand that.
We have had no media reporting of the investigation, subsequently, and I wonder if that's not a negative.
What are you suggesting, that there's a
There's a kind of negative cartoon in this.
A negative cartoon in the sense that we're covering up
We don't want to speak about the reality of this terrorist attack in those terms and take the necessary steps, at least not publicly, because of our fear of...
And those necessary steps are?
Well, I don't want to talk about those, but I think it's because I'm not sure what they are, because I don't know the facts. But you see, I'm saying that this is a kind of fear of expressing feelings that might injure feelings of a certain community.
I wish I could accept your premise, but I don't.
That's my premise.
Can I just say a word about this? Would it be, I might be wrong about this, but would it be fair that if people are not sure what the actual motivation was, and I think if that's right, it may be correct that they're hesitant to say it, to attribute it to something that would be sort of deeply condemning of some group unless they're really sure about it.
I don't think it necessarily is condemning to explore and report.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Renee Morris, and I am a journalist. And my question has to do with, with regard to the laws that we were discussing, that were presented on the panel. Is it a possibility that there could be a universal community, not the United Nations, obviously, that could set some standards as to what is sort of etched in stone, and that becomes a law in itself. It becomes something that you can look towards as to define what you think might be an answer to these questions. For example, on Rwanda or the Holocaust, they could be the, quote, authority as to someone could
of
look
kind
to
of
and they can disagree with it.
Supranational laws.
It's very dangerous.
Is that
Supernatural?
supranational laws, you mean?
Well,
Yeah, but
it would have to be an agreement of,
to do what? To tell his story?
no, I'm simply saying
To
that,
regulate or
not to regulate,
Yeah.
but to have an opinion that is written that this occurred, this occurred, this occurred. And there'll always be the naysayers, like we have Galileo or whatever, and then people came up and said, no, the Earth isn't round. I mean, I know people who don't think we landed on the moon.
Okay, I think we have that question, and then we'll have yours, and then
Okay.
we'll try to.
It's
thank
just
you.
a possibility.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Marcia DeSanctis, and this is a question for Professor Greenawalt. Is there ever a time at what point was something that's very, very left-wing or very, very right-wing in this administration, left-wing perhaps in the last, is there ever a line that's crossed that is actually considered treasonous, where something was so strong that it would actually be considered treason to criticize or to suggest some kind of action against the government, or perhaps wish for a president's failure or something along those lines?
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, and my understanding is the requirements of treason are actually extremely limited. So I think that this, you actually have to be offering aid to an enemy, a real enemy in wartime. The closest thing I can, that comes to mind, though, is that the rules about the Communist Party that existed in the 1950s were with really violence, if there was going to be one, was way down the road, where there were some criminal convictions and suppression. I think it's striking, though, that during the Vietnam War, which was highly controversial, that opinions were expressed, and that as far as I know, nobody got prosecuted for statements about that, quite contrary to what happened during the First World War. So,
okay. Does anybody want to encounter that question?
Regarding the previous question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think, in fact, your question is interesting because it's the debate we have regarding when you have a memories law. Whether denial of the Holocaust laws or, the government is not here of one specific country or the government of the world to write history. That's not the good solution. That cannot be the good solution.
I'd like to thank everybody on the panel. I'd like to thank you. We are not done. Don't reach for your coats. Don't reach for your guns. It's a great privilege to introduce Bernard-Henri Levy, who is really one of the most forthright and one of the bravest spokesmen for freedom of speech here or anywhere. And he will close this with a few minutes of closing statement. Bernard.
It's difficult to close because all that was said was really interesting, and not only interesting, paying tribute to the complexity of the debate. It's really one of the most complex and difficult debates, this question of freedom of speech. One point on which I think we all agreed is that speech is not a neutral vehicle. Speech is not just words, words, words. There is a weight, there is a consistency, there is a huge force of the words which cannot be treated just like this. Words is not only a vehicle of thought, it has a force as such. This is the point, I think, our discussion about denial of Holocaust, about the internet and all that, on which we could agree. Victor Hugo said, et le mot c'est le verbe, et le verbe c'est Dieu. Hein? Et le mot c'est le verbe, et le verbe c'est Dieu. Mallarmé, I quoted at the beginning. I think we all agree on the fact that both of them and many others are right when they insist of this incredible fire which is inside and beneath the words. We are not just playing with a neutral surface of things. when we speak about speech and about words, we are really speaking about the burning core of the things and of the human condition. This is true. These non-neutral words, which we call speech, therefore, I think we agree again on that, all of us, they can have a twofold vocation, a twofold role. They can kill and they can save. They can kill and they can save. If you listen, for example, to a French writer, I'm sorry, but I know a little better, of whom it is a lot questioned these days, who is Albert Camus. Albert Camus said that huge modern crimes, large-scale crimes of the 20th century could never have been committed without the legitimation, the acceleration of the words. He said that they were crimes of words. Crimes without words, crimes without speech would have been really infinitely less serious and grave and harmful. So words, according to Albert Camus, can be that, this acceleration of crimes. And words can be the contrary. They can save. They can save. Our brothers in Iran know that. They know that it is an addition of speeches, a freedom of words, which can save them from tyranny. And they are fighting for free speech before anything else, in a way. I welcome in my French journal, La Règle du Jeu, in its website, I devoted a special space to the voices of the resistance in Iran, the youngsters, the women, the human rights militants. They all of them say that the core of our fight is production, circulation of words, battle for free speech. The same could be said, and you know that in America better than anywhere, Google, the same could be said about China. The battle in China, the battle against this strange monster, which is a jungle capitalism mixed with the most tyrannic communism, which is a regime in China. The only possible resistance to that is the freedom of speech. And the dissidents in China, as the dissidents in Soviet Union 20 years ago, they fight for freedom of speech. In my youth, in the 70s, in the 80s, when we began to feel the Soviet empire being fragilisé, what was the real weapon? What was the real tool, if not the freedom of speech? That makes our discussion about internet at the same time serious and not so serious. Internet, of course, has to be moderated. Of course, internet is the theater and the space and the place of the worst. But at the time of the fight for democracy in China, at the moment where happens when the democratic wave in Iran expresses itself through Facebook and Twitter and internet, I think the real battle is not the battle for the constraints, for the moderation, for laws on internet, but freedom of internet. And my deep feeling is that internet can be the worst, can also be the best thing in the world. And my feeling is that the time will come when internet will find its own ways of regulations. There, in internet, the bad currency will be get rid of. by the good one. Maybe you will even see appear, maybe one day David Remnick will take the initiative with some people in the web of a sort of moral authority, giving a sort of label, a label to a negative or a positive label on the websites existing today, those who spread stupid rumors, those who build real information. We might see things like that. I really believe that this world of internet will find, with our help maybe, its ways of regulations. And the debate for me is not the debate of today. My real belief is that the emergency is to help the Chinese dissidents to have access, free access at Google, and to help the information in Iran to go out through Facebook and through Twitter. This is a democratic battle. Now, if I try to sum up as faithfully as possible our debates, the question which have been raised, I cannot avoid the evidence that a lot of our discussions turned around the question of Islam, Muslim communities in Europe, totalitarianism in Arab countries, and so on. About this, I would like not only to sum up, but maybe to make a step forward to clarify a few things, if you allow me. If you allow me. About the Muslim presence, the big Muslim community in France and in Europe, I would like to make one point very clear. It is true that in France, for example, in England, in Germany, there is a big Muslim community. What is not true is that this community should be considered as a threat, as itself, as a threat to democracy. This is not true. And not even as a threat against Judaism or Jews and so on. That is not true. The reality, in France I'm sure, elsewhere in Europe it's my feeling, is that this big Muslim community is crossed by, is divided by a line, a real front line dividing two camps, putting the stage for a real battle, a real civilization battle inside Islam between democratic forces and between fundamentalist and fascist forces. You have today in France a real fight, a political one, between fascism and democracy inside Islam. My feeling is that the fascist forces inside the Muslim community in France, they shout very, very much. You hear them a lot, as always. The extremists express themselves always much more strongly than the moderate. This is a law. But I don't believe that they are the majority. I do believe that they are. Today, it may change tomorrow, but at the moment when we speak, in France, in England, in Germany, my strong belief is that the biggest majority of this community has one aspiration, which is to follow the path of previous minorities having integrated themselves in the past in the French Republican model, and to adopt the values of democracy and republic. But it does not mean that the battle is not going on. It does not mean that you don't have some people, some civilian activists, some uncivilian activists, people in the middle like Tariq Ramadan. I know, good for you. I know that Tariq Ramadan has recuperated his visa to go to America. your problem. I think that Tariq Ramadan does not belong to this democratic wing of the Muslim community, but that is another question. So there is a battle going on there. This battle, for the moment, has not been won, and far from it, by the extremist forces. Now, if you try to look inside this battle, what are the stakes in this Muslim world, inside Europe, inside America? At the end of the day, you have the Muslims of America, you have in the Catskills this Muslim community which was linked to the murderers of Daniel Pearl. I found that in my book about Daniel Pearl. It is not only Europe, you have also a problem in America too. It's like anti-Semitism. It is not a European speciality. So what is going on in Islam, in Europe, in America, and in the Arab and non-Arab Islamic world? There is a question of religion and there is a question of politics. The question of religion, the religious debate, is not for me the most important, but it exists. It is a debate between those, and I rebound off something which has been said in the beginning. It is a discussion between those who inside Islam think that they are the only one, that there is only one faith, only one way to embrace the faith which is theirs, and those who believe that there is a lot of roads, a lot of paths. This is the real point. Christianity made a huge step forward, a huge progress. Christianity, Catholicism in particular, at the time of Vatican II. In Vatican II, one very simple thing has been said regarding the Jews. Before Vatican II, the Jews were considered as the fathers of the Christians. The very respected, revered fathers, but the fathers. Their book, their holy book, was considered as a testament, the Old Testament. The vocation of a father is to die and to be replaced by the son. And the vocation of an Old Testament is to disappear and to be replaced by the good one, by the new one. Vatican II changed completely the point of view by saying that Jews and Christians were not father and son, but were brothers. Elder brother, younger brother. This was Vatican II, and this was really an earthquake inside Catholicism. When it was said that it was not a relationship of fatherhood, but of brotherhood, then it was said that there was two possible roads toward the truth, that there was two possible ways to embrace it, and not only one which was scheduled to replace the other. Inside the Judaism, the same thing happened with Emmanuel Levinas, and before Emmanuel Levinas with Franz Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig, a very important German Jewish thinker of the beginning of the 20th century, who said also this very simple thing which changed all the landscape. There is two ways of access to the being. The being in the meaning of Aristotle. The being, there is not only one way, but two possible ways. The Christian way and the Jewish way. When this was said by Rosenzweig in L'Étoile de la Rédemption, and by Emmanuel Levinas in many of his books, it was the stone, the founding stone of the impossibility of fanaticism and of extremism in the Judaism. There can always be, as everywhere, some people who say that to discuss with the Arabs and so on deserve to be killed. Of course. But the mainstream of Judaism has changed with Rosenzweig and Levinas, because giving the possibility to the truth to be said in two different languages. Today, The mainstream is in Islam. The mainstream consists in saying that there was one false revelation, God speaking to Moses. One second imposture, fakeness, hoax, a second hoax, which was God speaking to the Christ. Hoax 1, hoax 2. And that at the end of the day came the only single, unique, direct speaking from God to somebody, who was God speaking to Muhammad. So this idea of two revelations being just fakes, hoax, brouillon, how do you say brouillon? Drafts, bad drafts, and then the word itself. This means that the Islamic world has not yet made the work which has been done by Christianity and by Judaism. The other things which the other religions have done and which Islam has still to do, and will do, I'm sure, is to consider that this given word has been given, but in spite of having been given by God, may be commented, discussed, put into debate between human beings. Each time a religion committed this act of saying that a given word can be subjected to human discussion, it was a revolution. It was a revolution in the whole world. When the Jews, for example, invented the Talmud, which is the very core of Judaism, much more than the Bible. Lévy said that the Jewish people is not the people of the Torah. He said, he went to the point to say that it was the people of the Talmud. Why? Because the Talmud is this place where the word of God is indefinitely discussed. Islam will enter definitely and forever in a ground where fanaticism will be impossible, will be completely excluded when it will adopt, invent, produce some sort of, it will not be the same of course, but something looking like la glose of the fathers of the church or the Talmud of the rabbis in Judaism. You have today some scholars in the Muslim world who believe that. Who believe that the solution, that the exit from the fanaticism is there, in the possibility, in the right, in the intellectual tools, allowing to consider that the given word is subject to discussion, has a meaning which is not closed, is like the wings of the spirit which are folded and which have to be unfolded, and so on. This is a religious question when in the Islamic world you will have, number one, the idea that there is 2, 3, 4 roads to the truth. And when you will have the idea that the given word is an open letter, like open letter to the president, published in the newspaper, an open letter, not only a letter, an open letter. When you will have these two things, all that belongs to religion in this question of freedom of speech inside Islam will be on the process of a solution. Now you have in the Islamic world another problem, which is politic. My neighbor of panel said that you had some countries in the Arab world which are totalitarian. Yes and no. Yes and no. I did not say totalitarian. I did not, and I would not say totalitarian. If we think about, if we think of the same countries or political movements, they are not totalitarian. If we want to be accurate, we have to say that they are the cue of an old comet, the end of an old black star, which was the black star, the horrible star of the fascism of the 30s. This is a thing which has been said here by my friend Paul Berman in a book published 10 years ago, and which I tried to develop myself in some posterior works. The Arabic world was absolutely not out of the fascist revolution. It was involved in it. There was an Arabic version of it through Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, but many other, Ba'ath Party, and so on and so on. And the point is that the Arabic world and the Muslim world is the only one to which the question of its fascist past has not been addressed. As long as it will not be addressed, as long as public opinions, the leaders, the Mubaraks, the people of Syria, the Assads, the Ayatollah advising Ahmadinejad, Ayatollah Yazdi, for example, very important person in Iran today who is a true fascist in the way of the 30s. As long as this question will not be raised clearly, which is not in religious terms but in political terms, we shall be completely blind in what happens in this world. You said that Israel is a catalyst of that. I don't think so. Israel is not even a catalyst. Without Israel, it would be exactly the same. It would be exactly the same. I had a few years ago a very strange experience. I spent a part of my time during 1 year in Pakistan. In Pakistan, they don't even know, not the leaders, of course, but the population has a very slight idea of what Israel is. The Palestinian case, they don't give a damn for that. Palestinian in Pakistan has a name, which is Kashmir. They care about Kashmir. So in this country where you care about Kashmir, where you never saw a Palestinian, where you have no Jews, nevertheless, you have this very strange anti-Zionism without Zionism, anti-Semitism without Jews, and so on and so on. So Israel is not the question. Without the existence of Israel, it would be exactly the same scheme. It would be exactly the same pattern. The pattern will exist with or without it, because it is an old story. Hamas and Hezbollah, for example, my problem is not again with Islam there. My problem is with fascism. Hamas and Hezbollah, the real problem is that they have their feet, they have their roots, they have their legs still here in the mud, in the muddy water of an old fascism which has not been yet dragged in this area of the world. And to finish, not the question of Israel, not totalitarianism but fascism, and about, somebody spoke about the burqas and the veil and scarf as a dress code. It is not a dress code. It is a political code. It is a political message. And if we, as long as we consider, I don't say that we have to forbid or not forbid. There is a big debate in France. Has to be forbidden or not in the public space or beyond the public space. This is a political question. But the deep question is to admit that the burqa, which has nothing to do with worshipping, as you know, which has nothing to do with Quran, all the Quranist specialists know that the bearing of burqa is nowhere in Quran recommended and ordered. It is not a religious topic. It is a political message. And the political message, who says what? Who says a very simple thing, a thing against which all Democrats in America and in Europe and in Muslim world fight and fight and fight since ages. The message of the burqa and of the scarf is that there is a sort of native inequality between men and women. The political message of burqa is that the men have a face, and the women, the face of a woman is not a face, is a scandal. This is a political message. The inequality between women and men consists in the fact that the face of the woman is an outrage, which has to be mastered, which has to be hidden, which has to be neutralized. This idea that the face of the woman and their body has to be neutralized because it is an agent provocateur, because it is a provocative agent, because it is a seed of disorder, because it is a way of destroying humanity, because it is an ontological impurity. This has nothing to do with Islam, thanks God. This has to do with an old tradition, which is a tradition, a version, a variant of fascism. So to finish with that, to finish with the whole thing, because it's my role, I'm sorry, the debate about freedom of speech or not, denial of Holocaust, and all the questions we have raised since 2 hours is not an academic debate, is not a religious debate. It is the brave old debate, which we know well. We had to face it, you Americans, us Europeans, and we defeated him. We defeated the bad part of the debate, and we will defeat it again in the new situation. It is a debate between democracy and fascism. This is the question of today in Iran, in China, in some parts of the Muslim world, and this is the battle we have to wage and to win, with, in particular, the freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
So please, thank you very much for your concluding remarks. Please join me in thanking our guests tonight for a great panel. Thank you again to the LICRA for their collaboration. And thank you all for coming. We look forward to welcoming you at Columbia again. Thank you all.